So I apologize for making it such a quick break, but we are trying to keep the trains running on time. We have another incredible panel coming up with an amazing lineup of speakers here to talk about IoT and the new revolution, new industrial revolution. Please welcome to the stage Vice President and Chief Technology Officer of General Electric, Chris Drumgoole, Chief Technology Officer for the Americas at VMware, Chris Wolf, Senior Vice President and President of Business Solutions, Nrg, Robert Gaudette, and the Executive Editor and Co-Founder of Recode, Kara Swisher. Hi, Kara.
Hi, everybody. Okay, have a seat.
What if I take the end?
Okay, we're going to talk about a whole range of things. I'm sorry we don't get questions from the audience. I wish we did, because I always like questions. I actually can't. You want to pull in a little bit on your delightful purple thing?
We'll rearrange the furniture.
Yeah. So I am very pleased, again, I just left Silicon Valley, I came in last night, and it's so nice to see more techie white men, because I don't see enough of them there. Wow. Anyway, I'm talking about women, a question of women in tech later, so you might want to come hear it. But here you go. But you guys are great. You guys are great.
But not you guys.
Yeah,
you guys are
good. You guys are great.
Perfect.
So let's talk about this issue, because one of the things I've been doing a lot is talking to a lot of the leaders of Silicon Valley about where the next industrial revolution is coming. I had an interview with Mark Andreessen, the well-known venture capitalist last year, and he was talking about the shift, what's happening now is just like the shift from farming to manufacturing, that we're undergoing in the next version of that. So I'd love for each of you to talk about where you think that is, and we're going to get into issues like privacy, responsibility of tech, what the challenges can be, and where it's going. So why don't we start with we have two Chris's and a Robert. So Chris number one.
Chris number one. Sure. So I think so. By means of introduction, my name's Chris Drumgoole, and I'm the CTO for General Electric. I think it's an interesting question. We believe fundamentally the same thing, even though I don't know that I would have used those words. But when you look at the businesses we're in, which are very much businesses that whether or not you realize it or not, you count on every day, and you count on our machines working every day and machines from our competitors, that to us is the next revolution, because the demand for things like electricity, travel, healthcare, renewable energy are only going up and up. And the ability to kind of reliably generate those things at a good cost point is getting harder and harder. And we think that, no offense to the consumer space around connected devices, industrial internet, I love my Nest, my house is a nerd's house. But we think the real revolution is being able to start harnessing the reams of data and information that come off of the kind of plumbing of life, for lack of a better way to put it, and use that to deliver more efficiency and better uptimes, which then ultimately drives costs down, which then means more people can get access to those core basic services. So I know it's kind of the highfalutin example, but it really is, in our minds, that kind of simple. It's how do we take a world of kind of people pulling levers into a world of smarter decisions and automated decisions to deliver better services.
On everything, on all the plumbing, essentially, is what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, my marketing people don't like it when I call it the plumbing, but we're kind of the plumbing of life. I mean, we make sure that electricity works, we make sure that you can get where you're going, and no one ever thinks about, well, these guys think about it based on what they do, but no one really thinks about the giant turbine that's spinning somewhere in the country right now, or the windmill that's spinning to generate electricity. But it's very much like plumbing in that the second it stops spinning, you think about it a lot. And anything we can do to automate the process of making sure it never stops spinning, or that we know it's going to stop spinning before it does, is better for everybody.
Which is something that your previous CEO had talked a lot about getting in, Jeff Immelt. But go ahead, other Chris.
Okay, other Chris. I'm the Global Field and Industry CTO at VMware. Basically, we have a pretty liberal definition of industry, and it's effectively things that don't fit into a neat R&D bucket fall into my organization. So Edge and IoT has been a focus area of myself for the past 2 years. And to take a slightly different angle, what I think is really exciting about Edge and IoT in general is that we're reaching a time where we're placing data and applications adjacent to the point of either data creation or data consumption. And that's creating new user experiences. It's creating competitive advantages for business because we're doing a lot more in terms of real-time inference. And these can be little safety things, such as leveraging cameras to position flight equipment around airplanes and doing that safely. Leveraging cameras to count the bags going down the jetway so that I can actually turn planes around faster because I don't know, how, or at the point at which the overhead bin space is full. I think that's exciting. But the other realm that we see is, I met with a retailer yesterday. They're trying to change customer intimacy in the stores by bringing technology into the store and effectively treating the store like it's an application platform. So there's really a new wave of user experiences that are going to come as a result of IoT, and it gets much more interesting, I think, when people start to see and touch the technologies, right, beyond what we think about on the manufacturing side or the real early practical use cases of IoT today.
Okay, Robert?
So I'm Robert Gaudette with Nrg Energy. I run the business solution side, so that basically means my customers are large businesses, not consumers. So when I think about the Internet of Things and I think about the next revolution, it's really about, so we're an energy company. We think about, I believe in the plumbing comment. I think energy is the kind of core of civilization and where we're going from here, and how we get there and how that's changing is important. I think what this next phase is doing is it's democratizing energy. When you think about the system 50 years ago, it was very centralized plants, big transmission lines. You got the power from whatever they told you you were getting it from. What's happened over the last 15 years and what's going to happen over the next 15 years is that system has become much more free to people making choices, and people can choose how they get power for their companies or their homes. But they can also provide a service. And the interesting part about the Internet of Things for me is that it enables each business, each customer to think about how they can contribute into that energy market and how they can harness that power and ultimately use market forces to pay for it. And so the things that are around, the Internet of Things, when I think of it or when I talk to my kids about it, I'm thinking of, some sensor on my phone. But GE thinks about the Internet of Things at sensors on very large turbines or on jet engines. And where we're at, and as we progress, I think as you go from the big pieces, which are what my customers have now, and move forward into the smaller pieces, which is what I have in my pocket, I think that's where this gets really interesting, and it creates a lot of things to talk about and a lot of things to think about.
So there's a lot of things. There's privacy, security, which we talked about. Let's start with the when these things are rolling out. Obviously, there was a new company I just saw in San Francisco called Density, which is about how people use offices. And it's sensors. It's essentially a lot of sensors everywhere. I talked to another group of people that talked about sensors that you actually throw like grains of sand into a nuclear accident, for example, and it can bring all kinds of data in and stuff like that. When you think about where it's going to have the most impact, because most people know the Internet of Things as either an Echo, an Amazon Echo, a Nest, or Apple's effort in the area. Where do you think the most promising areas? You obviously think energy.
Yeah.
Talk about a couple of examples of what could, in the real life, is happening.
Sure. So if you think about, it's a combination of the sensor data that you're talking about. So you figure out how to get or plan for the right people in the right office and how you set that up, how you turn lights on and off, how you adjust for sunlight. But more importantly, I think where the real opportunity is that you start thinking about how you adjust your behaviors and make it financially make sense to adjust your behaviors so that rather than have a rush on everybody going into the office because they all want to be there at 4 o'clock in the afternoon in California, incent people to come in at 11 when you have a resource and you don't have a power problem and you're trying to, you can balance the markets. I'm a markets guy. I grew up an energy trader, so I think about it in dollars. You can use sensors and you can use the data that you collect around our customers and around what they do, and then line that up with the marketplace itself, the energy marketplace, and provide financial incentive to actually change behavior. We see that from everything from small, commercial offices to choosing to, not turn on all their ACs at the same time, to very large industrials. Like in the summer, this summer in ERCOT, large industrials are going to be incented to turn down their processes because it's 102 degrees in Houston and the price of power is $4,000. Data and sensors enable that communication, and I think that transformation makes it more efficient for everybody.
What do you think the biggest application is?
I think, I'm sorry.
first.
I think similar to the way Rob thinks about it, I think we think about it as there's kind of two factors, really in our world three, but two factors around IoT. There's the first is the ability to collect just tremendous amounts of data that you didn't have before, and then make, I'll call it reactive or planning decisions based on that data. And then the second is where we think actually the further step down the road is how can you actually intelligently make real-time decisions based on that data. So I'll give you an example. So in our world, one of the things you probably don't know we make is locomotives. So we make all locomotives, not all, but many of the locomotives that are around the country today. And if you think about that business, they've been around for hundreds of years. The data collection in terms of how a locomotive was performing, its fuel efficiency, its route efficiency, were probably an engineer with a logbook who would read 6 or 7 gauges, write them in a logbook, and then if every corporate process aligned, that logbook would suddenly get into planning. You kind of fast forward to now where that locomotive is fully instrumented, and now we can download or real-time connect everything that's going on to it at a much more granular level, every pressure, cycle time, all that fun stuff. So that puts us in an ability that we already have today to make kind of proactive decisions. So you'll hear us talk a lot about proactive maintenance. Now we can take that locomotive off the rails before it breaks. That's interesting, that's transformative, that's new, but we think that's actually really only the first step. The next step, and what you'll see on it, is where we can actually start put processing power, combination of in that locomotive and in the cloud, that starts making real-time performance decisions around how it's running. So we have a pilot with this going in the US right now, where we're seeing on an average locomotive, just by doing subtle things like adjusting the way it brakes or adjusting the way it accelerates or slowing down because it is now aware of a backup that won't hit for 2 more hours, but it's now aware of it. We're starting to see fuel savings on an individual locomotive basis measured in tens of thousands of gallons a year. You do the math, hundreds of locomotives, tens of thousands of gallons of fuel, not gas, diesel, excuse me, around the world, and suddenly you have a real efficiency play.
That's the general hope, is that we have just doing everything anecdotally at this point.
And that one's real, though. The locomotive is legitimately running today, and that's the kind of, if you take that and extrapolate it out, is the hope.
Yeah, and to double click on that, we're working with an organization that's bringing self-driving locomotives to market this year, actually, in Australia. So it's a pretty exciting time, and that gets to Chris's point on real-time inference, right? When I'm talking about a self-driving train, I can't wait for the cloud to make a decision for me, right, in order to stop the train, as an example. And a lot of this, what this has meant is, and this has had a ripple effect out to the cloud, is that cloud providers understand that for them to drive things like real-time inference, I actually have to move the cloud service adjacent to the point where I'm collecting the data. So this is where we're spending a lot of time driving partnerships with partners such as Amazon Web Services to actually bring the cloud service physically right onto the train itself and not have to worry about some type of latency back and forth to the cloud. But I think that inference part is really this next cusp. As we can understand more data in real time and make better decisions based on that data, the companies that are successful are going to be the ones that have the best data science, have the best capabilities to drive inference, and then that creates a very rich cycle of innovation that becomes even more difficult to disrupt if I'm more of a legacy-minded company, as an example.
Right, so they're creating moats around, like Amazon, for example, with this Kiva, buying Kiva, which is those who don't know it, it moves all the goods around the Amazon warehouses now, almost without any people. I was just at a new one up in Seattle recently, in Kirkland. But let's talk about what that means then, because one of the things I've been spending a lot of time this year on is talking to tech leaders about their responsibility, of which they appear to have none at this moment. And if anyone who watched the hearings, I think pretty much the only thing I got from it was Mark Zuckerberg can wear a suit and not sweat in it, which is a huge accomplishment to many. So let's talk about the idea of what happens, because there's lots of issues that fall off this. One, I've just done really interesting, we're doing a series on the future of work with MSNBC, and we had the head of Google, we've had the head of Apple, we're going to have a lot of the leaders talk about it, but one of the issues is jobs, obviously. When you think about these, most of the people from Silicon Valley talk about a happy, shiny future. This is going to be better. It's going to be like, as Mark said, farming to manufacturing. when I asked him, okay, what happened during that transition, there was a lot of social unrest, there's a lot of political unrest, job unrest, and it lasted a long time because it took a long time for it to roll out. This is a very short time frame from what you're all talking about. Can you first talk about the idea of jobs and how that impacts it? And then I'd love to get into privacy and security, which I think security is probably the most problematic issue. So anyone want to tackle jobs?
I would love to talk about jobs first because
Okay.
it's something that I'm really passionate about. I think your assessment is spot on in terms of the impact that technology is going to have on people. And I think there's two camps here, and I've had lots of discussions with technology leaders about this. And one camp says, well, you know what? We have industrial revolutions all the time. People will recover, people will learn new jobs, and the world goes on. And that's absolutely true. That we can go down that path, and through history we have. But in my opinion, technology companies have a moral responsibility to give back and to invest in retraining people whose jobs they're displacing. It's easy just to say, well, you know what, the world can catch up and we're going to donate to X charities or something. But I really believe as technology companies, we can do far more than that. We can really look, we can measure, we talk about measuring and analytics, we can measure our impact that our technology is having on specific jobs, and we can reinvest that impact back into those displaced jobs in terms of helping those folks find newer and more exciting jobs, right, that can help them move on with their families. I think, to me, it's just the right thing to do as technologists. We have the capabilities to understand and do these things, and we should. It's the collective responsibility of Silicon Valley.
What is it within technology where they don't feel that? Because I can tell you they don't.
Agree.
100%. Some of them talk about it, but most of them don't either understand the consequences or care not about them at all. And in fact, when I quiz them, I say, what about the family of blacksmiths that used to, tend to the horses? They're like, well, too bad. That's just, there'll be a family of store owners or a family of whatever. How do you get that? And if it's not them, and then it would have to be government, which wouldn't be the answer many of us would want to have. But we talk about that concept.
Yeah, I mean, probably not the best answer, but to be blunt, I agree with you. I don't get why we don't see it as a responsibility. I think that the industry, the tech industry specifically, does suffer from a bit of combination of naivete and ego that makes it feel like for some reason this is different than the other resolutions because it's software. Well, at the time of Eli Whitney or Thomas Edison, they were just as revolutionary when they came up and faced many, if not the exact same challenges. So that's the naivete and the ego part is I think we're, as society, and I am not qualified to speak on this, give you more my opinion, I think we as society are naive to think that we shouldn't look back from what went wrong that time and learn, because jobs will be changed, the economy will differ, and to your point, it took an awful long time last time for that to figure out. So why don't we take some of this great brain power we have and figure out why it took so long last time and make sure that it happens this time with significantly less suffering and shorter period of time. So I think that's it. I think we as society are naive if we don't think that the improvements in data collection, connectivity, and artificial intelligence aren't going to dramatically change what people consider to be a good, reliable, safe job, and not over the next 3 decades, probably over like the next 4 to 5 years.
Exactly. It's an interesting, because I think right now, they're thinking in the next 5 years, 50% of young people will just have gig jobs, just gig, not regular jobs, or that certain areas are impacted and we don't know. And you can see the iteration when you talk about even just self-driving cars. Everyone thinks about truck drivers, but I'm thinking about malls and insurance companies and gas stations and mechanics, and eventually lawyers and doctors and higher paying jobs as it iterates through the economy. Robert, why don't you talk about this concept? Because in energy, there's all kinds of people everywhere.
Oh, sure. And so we're, it wasn't the Internet of Things that did it, right?
Right.
It was, we are over, call it the last, up until about 10 years ago, Thomas Edison could have woken up and fixed the system because he still remembered it. Nothing had changed. But we've seen transition from very large central stations to distributed solar and wind. And so, it's been a success story because you've seen people transition. It's been a success story at the macro level. At the micro level, right, you've got the guy who, his entire family has been mining coal for the last 90 years,
right.
and now they've got to be retrained. I think that we have an opportunity, and I've found that, I've been in the business for 20 years, which, is not a long time, but in the span of tech, that's, 12 decades. And I've seen the transitions, but I've also seen the resiliency of people. As long as they're given an opportunity, they can make the next step. And we're in a world where we're transitioning what our business is. We used to be about flipping megawatts or flipping power to people, and we're transitioning that business from I want to sell you a shiny thing, to we're providing you a service. 85% of the people that used to be in the shiny thing camp are now transitioning into that service. And it's because you still need technical skill and you still need to be able to talk to human beings. I also kind of get the free pass. I'm a user of tech, so I would love for them to have all kinds of social responsibility and think about what they do. Mark also could tie a tie, which was shocking to me.
Someone did that for him, but go ahead.
But what I get to do and what I see as an opportunity and what we're doing in this revolution is we're empowering companies, right? We're making part of their cost basis or their cost line of energy go down. And with that, they can spend that money on training for their people, growing their business, improving their communities, and we're trying to do that in a responsible way. So I get excited about it. Like I'm less worried about me displacing people's jobs because we're adding algorithms, we're adding data, but we still have the core of what we've had before, and now we're making companies more successful at what they do.
All right, it's going to be an interesting in that area, and I definitely don't think the government's focused on it in any way whatsoever. Let's talk about privacy. That's just been in the news, obviously, in a consumer sense,
Sure.
and the malevolent players coming into these systems. Now, if you're worried about Russians all over Facebook, Russians all over the energy grid is even more problematic.
Yes.
And in any of these things, the privacy, if you're worried about your email messages being read and marketed back to you, you should be very worried about your energy use or your locks in your homes or your everything else that's in there. So if each of you can sort of address that, what's your bigger concern, privacy or security, and what are the big problems you see?
I'll start because I'm quick. It's absolutely security for us. The more we distribute the energy system, the more we get into people's homes and businesses to control equipment, to make things happen, the more essential security is. And from a privacy perspective, that's a 3-hour conversation about whether we're ready to be regulated or do we have the right regulators to do it.
So talk about that, because I think we do not. I think judging from just those hearings last week,
I think
they
they
don't like terms of service, apparently. That's the biggest issue our country faces, is that we can't read terms of service. But I think there were some more serious issues they didn't seem to want to address or incapable of.
So in energy, the regulation around privacy and usage is fairly strong. You can't, as an energy provider, I can't just run around and talk about how you use power or how your neighbor uses power without your permission in most places. Where we're going to run into a problem is that regulators are set up to run the energy system of the last decade, and as technology becomes more important, as we become more distributed, that's a different skill set, and that's a different view on privacy. And so we can get customers to give us permission to look at things, but we still don't have the constraints and controls that we're ultimately going to need to protect everybody.
Chris, what about you?
Yeah, I think there's a couple interesting things here. First, I work with two different camps of customers, especially in the IoT context, where one is, let's just send all of our data to the cloud and we'll just kind of figure it out, right? The other is to say, I don't want any liability for any of that data, so I want to collect or draw something really fast, and I want to get rid of the data as quickly as possible. So these are definitely two different models, and I think as regulations mature and as we understand what consumer expectations are relative to privacy, some of that will help. But the security part, I think, is very interesting because for a lot of folks, it's somewhat terrifying. We're working with a retailer right now that has 6,000 stores. They want to bring more IoT type technologies into the stores, but they are very worried, and naturally so, about securing the connectivity between each individual sensor and each individual, say, IoT gateway. and then really understanding, how difficult or easy would it be to spoof a sensor, to inject false data into the system, right? And there's lots of bad things that can happen. So our belief on this is to really start to change that security paradigm. Your security has to be more dynamic than the threats that you face. So to make security more dynamic, right, to simplify it, that means transitioning security from being hardware-based appliances to being something I can truly define in software, and allow that security models to be more fluid, or allow my firewalls to be more fluid, and everything that I do to protect my data, right, and interconnectivity points between that data is something that we see is going to be a major area of focus for our customers going forward over the next 5 to 10 years.
And so their worry is regular attacks or being able to manipulate almost anything.
Yeah, correct. It's compromising data, it's consuming data, it's inserting false data. There's lots of interesting challenges that start to happen there. Especially thinking about an autonomous train as an example.
Yeah, I was
right?
thinking
A
about
bad
that.
data signal could have pretty disastrous results.
It sounds like a movie that The Rock will be in at some point, and he'll save us. But
He's a
in
new
real
dad.
life, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I think, so on the privacy part, I'm not really, we tend to be with macro data, so I'm not the best guy to talk about that. But from a security point of view, we run one of the largest private networks in the world, and if you think about the businesses we're in, we have we make nuclear reactors, we make generators, we have an interesting perspective on that. And I will tell you that the biggest thing that we've learned in the last several years around securing data is that basically the industry needs to throw away almost everything it learned over the last 20 years. Because almost every construct around how technology people think about securing data traditionally, networks, firewalls, it's all garbage at this point. Our operating
Is that a technical term, garbage?
very,
Okay,
extremely. We made a fundamental decision about 2 years ago to change the entire architecture of GE's entire connectivity to our customers, to our branches, to our plants, to our devices, recognizing that the ages-old construct of you can trust the network is gone. So we assume everything on the network is a hostile actor by default until proven otherwise. And that has driven an entire change in the way we staff, augment, write, define security. So our network and our applications today look nothing like they would have even 5 years ago. And that's purely because security went from being something that you kind of have to think about making sure you bake in to fundamentally it's one of the design constructs. And in 2 minutes, it's kind of hard to get into the depth of the transition. But trust me when I tell you, think about Russians attacking Facebook and exactly extrapolate what we do and imagine what we deal with on a daily basis.
And is that a combination of AI and human interaction or just machine?
I think that's the vision.
Machine.
I would say the vision is more machine. We're
Right.
very human today still.
Right.
I think there's bright spots and packets where we can start counting on data, machines looking for data, but overall today it's still very human. I think if we don't, it's a volume question, right? The wall's only so big. If we don't
Yeah.
figure out how to leverage the very IoT we've been talking about for outside here, as well for inside, and start having machines make decisions, then eventually you'll lose the battle.
All right, so I'm going to finish up. We just have 2 minutes. I'd love you each to talk about something that you would like to see happening in IoT, something, you don't have to say jetpacks, but like something like that some process that would be different than it is today, and the time frame of when you think that's going to happen.
Sure. You can start it.
Oh, that's exciting. Yeah, sure.
As a consumer on the home level, I'd love to see some standardization.
Some what?
Some standardization.
Right.
Industry protocols. I mean, as a homeowner, I now have 5 people competing to be the IoT hub thing in my house, and none of them want to talk to each other for competitive reasons, so nothing works together, much to my interest, my wife's pain. I think that's from the consumer side. On the industrial side, I'd actually probably give the same answer. I think there's entirely too many people trying to stake their claim that we're going to end up with a mishmash of standards. So some standards on how we collect data and how we report it over the next couple of years for interoperability.
And how do you get to that then?
You need a better politician than I am, but I think you have to get a couple different people of differing economic interests to agree, which I'm not really that great at. But I think that's what we need. You need some sort of industry body to make the HDMI of industrial internet.
For these things, you're absolutely right, because it's a free-for-all in the consumer space, for sure.
And they have a vested interest not to work with each other while pretending they do.
Right. All we know is they're all listening to us, but go ahead, next.
Yeah, I think another area, we haven't really talked too much about it, but it's certainly going to be emerging over the next 3 to 5 years, is augmented reality. And there's a lot of work that we're trying to do to lay the foundation for that. And it really boils down to getting the data and the application logic incredibly close to the consumer of that particular application or service. We define incredibly close for the geeks out there, probably less than 5 milliseconds away. It'll probably be even sub-millisecond at some time. But you have to totally think differently. And why this is exciting is this actually ushers in a new round of disruption where the early cloud pioneers took advantage of cloud velocity. Now that those disruptors in augmented reality are going to be able to take advantage of new paradigms at the edge, new ways to actually write applications that live adjacent to where people are. And as well, we'll have to move at times because people are constantly moving around as well. So there's just a new wave of technology that's going to come.
I agree with you.
This
This is something that obsesses Tim Cook. Apple is really quite moving deeply into augmented reality in a way that I was surprised by in a recent interview with him. Last up.
So as the user,
Yeah, both.
I would like to get to a point where I would love for everybody to talk to each other, and I would love for us to be able to remember that at the end of whatever device or service or whatever we're talking about, there is a customer. And the more the different products and services that people in this room and others develop, the more we can harness those together and actually provide a service that's worthwhile and financially savvy for the customer. And until we stop fighting with each other, we're not going to ultimately get there. So I want people to work together, and I want to make sure that we're all focused on, at the end of the day, the guys who pay all of us, which is the customer.
Yeah, I'd like them all to get out of my house, really. But anyway, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.